The foolish raiders. The void of space stretched endlessly before the Varkal's wrath, a heavily armed raider vessel under the command of Karvok, a ruthless warlord feared across the sector. His crew of mercenaries and scavengers had spent years preying on weak, defenseless ships, mostly traders and lost travelers. But today, their scanners had picked up something far more interesting. A lone human ship, Karvok muttered, his mandibles clicking in amusement as he studied the readings on the holo display. The vessel was small, unmarked, drifting silently through the darkness. No fleet, no escorts, no signs of distress. Just alone. His second-in-command, Vashrik, let out a short guttural laugh. Humans never travel alone. Their fleets move in numbers. This must be a lost relic, an easy prize. The bridge echoed with the laughter of their crew. Over the years, the legends of human ships had grown. Stories of them surviving impossible battles, disappearing without a trace, or destroying enemies far larger than themselves. But Karvok had never believed such nonsense. He had fought humans before. They were clever, sure, but in the end, they bled and died like everyone else. "Prepare to board," Karvok ordered, leaning back in his command seat. "If there are humans on that ship, we'll sell them as slaves. If it's empty, we strip it for parts." The Varkal's wrath closed in, its weapons primed. The human ship remained eerily still, not reacting, not fleeing. Karvok expected some sign of resistance, a distress call, a desperate maneuver. But there was nothing, just silence. Vashrik hesitated. "Commander, this is strange." Karvok growled. "Scared of an empty ship?" Vashrik straightened. "No, sir, but something is wrong. It's not even trying to move." Karvok waved a dismissive claw. "They've probably run out of power. Send a boarding party. I want to see what's inside." A squad of raiders, armed and armored, launched toward the human vessel. Their small boarding craft latched onto the side, cutting through the hull. The bridge crew waited, listening to the comms channel as the raiders breached the ship. For the first few moments, there was nothing but static. Then a voice crackled through. "We're inside. It's dark. No crew. No signs of life." Karvok smirked. "Told you. Just a derelict." The raiders moved further into the ship, their helmet cams sending back grainy footage. The corridors were narrow, metallic, and cold. The air was thick with something, like mist, clinging to the walls. Then the feed from the first raider cut out. "Recall. Report." No response. The second raider cursed. He was right in front of me. Then, gone. More static. Another scream. Another lost signal. Karvok's amusement faded. "Pull them out. Now." But there was no answer. The entire squad was silent. The only sound left was a single distorted voice on the comms. "You should not have come." The bridge crew stiffened. Karvok's claws tightened around his command seat. Then, without warning, the human ship moved. It had been still all this time, but now its engines roared to life. And it was facing them. The bridge of Varkal's wrath was deathly silent. Karvok's claws dug into the armrests of his command chair as he stared at the human ship on the main display. It had been motionless only moments ago, a ghostly derelict floating through space. Now its engines burned bright, and its nose was pointed directly at them. The transmission still crackled through their comms, repeating the same eerie message. "You should not have come." The voice was distorted, neither male nor female, as if it wasn't coming from a person at all. Vashrik swallowed hard, his mandibles twitching. "Sir, we lost the entire boarding party. Their life signs just vanished." Karvok clenched his jaw. "No bodies, no distress signals. What about their suits?" Vashrik shook his head. "Nothing. It's like they were never there." The crew exchanged nervous glances. These were seasoned raiders, killers who had torn through countless ships before. They had fought humans before, too, tough creatures, but not invincible. Yet this was something else. Karvok forced himself to remain calm. This had to be a trick. Scan the ship for life signs again. The scanners whirred, data scrolling across the holoscreen. The results sent a cold chill through the bridge. No life detected. Vashrek's voice was barely a whisper, his usual arrogance gone. That's impossible. Our men were just inside. The human ship did not fire. It did not flee. It simply drifted forward, its motion slow and deliberate, as if it was watching them. Karvok snarled, refusing to be intimidated by ghost stories. Enough of this. Arm weapons and target their engines. If they won't give us their ship willingly, we'll take it by force. The weapons officer hesitated before pressing the command. The Varkal's wrath had superior firepower, enough to rip apart a vessel of that size in seconds. Their plasma cannons locked on, charging up with a high-pitched whine. But the moment they fired, the human ship flickered, vanishing from their targeting systems. The plasma bolts struck nothing but empty space. The crew gasped in confusion. Karvok slammed his fist against the console. Where did it go? Sir, a crew member stammered. It's still there, but our sensors aren't reading it. It's like it isn't real. The ship reappeared just as suddenly. Now closer. Too close. Its blackened hull was unlike any human design Karvok had seen before. Sleek, almost organic, as if the ship itself was alive. Then came the second transmission. You are being hunted. The lights on the bridge flickered. The air grew heavy, charged with an unnatural presence. A deep, guttural noise rumbled through the ship, not from the human vessel, but from inside the Varkal's wrath. The crew's panic was immediate. Vashrek's claws trembled as he checked the internal sensors. Something just came aboard. Karvok spun toward him. Impossible. No ships docked with us. The alarms screamed through the corridors. Crew members shouted in terror over the intercom, their voices cut short by gurgled cries. And then, silence. The bridge crew froze, staring at the displays, waiting for something, anything, to explain what had just happened. The ship's scanner showed nothing, yet more and more life signs kept disappearing. One by one, they were being picked off. A shadow moved at the edge of Karvok's vision. He turned sharply, weapon drawn, but saw nothing. Then the voice returned, louder this time. Run. The human ship did not need to fire a single shot. It had already won. Karvok's grip on the armrest tightened as he watched the horror unfold on the bridge. Every screen flickered between static and unreadable symbols. His crew was frantic, shouting over each other as they tried to make sense of what was happening. But no matter what they did, the human ship remained still outside, like a predator watching its prey struggle before the final strike. Vashrek's mandibles quivered as he tried to regain control of the sensors. Sir, I don't understand. The ship is still there, but it's like it's facing in and out. 1 second, the scanners read it as a solid mass. The next, it's just gone. Karvok's eyes narrowed. Then stop relying on sensors. Use your eyes. That ship is real. We saw it move. We heard the transmission. It's playing tricks on us, but we will not be fooled. The crew around him exchanged uneasy glances. He could feel their fear, but he had to hold them together. He was Karvok, a captain of the Varkal raiders. He had torn through fleets, reduced entire colonies to ashes. No single human ship, no matter how strange, would make him falter. Before he could issue another command, a low hum reverberated through the hull. It started as a distant vibration, but quickly grew into something unnatural, something that seemed to crawl into their bones. The lights dimmed for a moment, and in that instant, Karvok saw it. A shadow standing at the far end of the bridge. It was humanoid, but its form was flickering, shifting like a glitch in reality itself. The figure stood motionless, its presence sending a cold dread through the crew. Vashrek gasped, his claws scrambling for his weapon. What is that? Karvok spun around, his blaster already aimed at the figure, but as soon as he blinked, it was gone. The air felt heavier, like something unseen was pressing down on them. The crew was on the edge of panic, some gripping their weapons, others stepping back toward the exits as if preparing to flee. Then, without warning, the ship's internal comms crackled to life. The voice that had spoken before returned, but now it was inside their ship. You were warned. The temperature on the bridge dropped. The screens around them glowed with distorted images, battlefields long past, human ships burning, but never truly destroyed. The images twisted, replaying over and over, but in each one, something had changed. Human ships that had been struck down would flicker back to life, whole and untouched, as if the universe itself refused to let them die. Karvok growled, "This is a mind game. They want us to break. I refuse." The crew did not share his conviction. One officer, barely able to hold his composure, turned and sprinted toward the exit. The moment he reached the door, the lights failed completely. Darkness swallowed the bridge. The only illumination now came from the emergency red lights, casting everything in an eerie glow. The ship trembled, a deep, unnatural groan echoing from the very walls. And then came the screams. Not from the bridge, not even from the hallways. The screams came from the human ship. The horrifying realization settled in. There were voices aboard that vessel. But if the humans had died long ago, then who, or what, was screaming now? Vashrek was shaking. "Sir, I think that ship is not just a ship. I think it's something else. Something alive." Karvok refused to believe it. He had seen strange technology, powerful weapons, but ships were just ships. They did not haunt. They did not stalk. They did not whisper from the shadows. Then the emergency lights flickered one last time, and the shadow returned, closer than before. The bridge was silent except for the labored breathing of the crew. Every shadow now felt alive. Every flicker of light a potential sign of movement. Karvok refused to be afraid. Fear was for the weak, for those who had never tasted battle. But this was different. The presence aboard their ship wasn't an enemy he could simply blast into nothingness. It was something else, something beyond his understanding. Then the ship shuddered violently. A deep, grinding noise reverberated through the hull, like metal twisting against itself. The crew braced themselves as warning sirens blared. Vashrek scrambled back to his station, his claws flying over the controls. "Sir, our engines just stopped." Karvok stormed toward the control panel. "What do you mean stopped?" "I mean they're offline. No damage, no external interference. It's like something just turned them off." A cold chill ran through the bridge. That wasn't possible. A system shutdown required input from either the crew or an external override. But there had been no transmission, no visible hack. The only thing that had changed was the presence of that damn human ship. "Restart them. Now." I'm trying, sir, but it's like the ship isn't listening to us anymore." Karvok clenched his jaw. His ship was state-of-the-art, one of the finest raider vessels ever constructed. It didn't just stop working. He turned back to the viewport, glaring at the lone human ship still drifting in the void. It had not moved, not attacked, just watched. And then the comms crackled again. This time, the voice was different. Not the mechanical tone from before. This one was softer, but far more unsettling. It was a whisper, just loud enough to be heard over the static. "You should have left when you had the chance." A chill ran down the spine of every crew member. Karvok ignored their fearful expressions and took a step toward the central console. "Who are you?" he demanded. For a moment, there was silence. Then something new appeared on their screens. Data streams, old battle records, events from before Karvok's time. Grainy footage showed human ships engaging enemy fleets, their hulls torn apart by weapons fire. But just as the enemy ships moved in for the kill, the footage distorted. The wrecked human ships shimmered, then reassembled themselves in impossible ways, their forms flickering between what they had been and what they were becoming. The crew gasped as the next image appeared. A Varkal raider ship, one of their own, breaking apart in the exact same manner, consumed by some unseen force. The timestamp was from centuries ago, but the Varkal had never fought against such an enemy before. Had they? Karvok narrowed his eyes. What is this? A trick. The voice returned, layered now, as if multiple whispers were speaking at once. You think you are the first to come here, the first to challenge the void, the first to mock what you do not understand. The temperature dropped even further. The shadows on the bridge seemed to stretch, reaching toward the crew. One officer let out a strangled gasp as his screen flickered to life with a single phrase. They never left. Vashrek's mandibles twitched in growing panic. Captain, we need to leave. Now. Whatever this is, it's beyond us. Karvok hesitated. He had never backed down from a fight. Never retreated. But this wasn't a battle. He could feel it now. Something ancient, something patient, something that had been watching for a long, long time. A sudden clang rang through the ship. The crew snapped their heads toward the sound. It had come from the outer hull. Something, or someone, had just landed on their ship. Karvok drew his weapon, his instinct screaming at him that they were no longer alone. He turned to his crew, his voice firm despite the unease clawing at his mind. Arm yourselves. Whatever is out there, we face it together. But deep down he knew. This was no ordinary enemy. And there was no running from what was coming. The silence stretched across the bridge, thick and suffocating, as every crew member stared at the external sensors. The impact had been real. Something had attached itself to their ship, and yet there was no clear indication of what it was. No alarms for a hull breach, no signs of weapons fire. Just a single, solitary impact. Karvok's grip tightened around his plasma rifle as he took a step forward. His second-in-command, Vashrek, looked at him with wide, unblinking eyes, his claws twitching over the control panel. Captain, Vashrek whispered, his voice barely above a breath. There's nothing there. Karvok narrowed his eyes. Explain. Vashrek swallowed, tapping furiously at the controls, forcing the external cameras to focus on the point of impact. The screen flickered and adjusted, zooming in on the hull where the sound had come from. At first, it was just the metallic plating, smooth and untouched, the same as it had always been. Then, something shifted. It wasn't movement, not exactly. It was like the absence of movement, like space itself had bent around something unseen. The rest of the crew recoiled. Karvok didn't. He refused to flinch. Magnify, he ordered. Vashrek hesitated but complied. The image zoomed further, bringing the strange distortion into focus. What they saw made no sense. The metal hull was intact, but the texture was wrong. It pulsed ever so slightly, like the ship itself was breathing. A low hum resonated through the bridge. It wasn't coming from the ship's systems. It was coming from outside. One of the younger officers let out a terrified hiss. Captain, this isn't natural. We need to detach from whatever that human ship is and jump to FTL now. Karvok ignored him. Open comms. Direct link. Vashrek hesitated. Sir, we don't even know if. Do it. The channel clicked open. For a moment, there was nothing but static. Then that same layered voice returned, except this time, it didn't whisper. It boomed, filling every inch of the bridge, rattling the consoles, and making the lights flicker. You are trespassing. Karvok clenched his jaw. This is Varkal Raider Doomspire. Identify yourself. Silence. Then another sound joined the hum. A scraping noise. It was coming from inside the ship. Every crew member snapped their heads toward the source. The sound echoed through the corridors beyond the bridge, slow and deliberate, as if something was dragging metal across the walls. The crew tensed. Karvok signaled two of his strongest warriors. "Check it out. Report back immediately." The two warriors nodded, weapons raised, and hurried toward the exit. The moment the doors slid shut behind them, the lights dimmed further. The scraping sound grew louder. Vashrik turned toward Karvok, his mandibles clicking rapidly in fear. "Sir, I think we should retreat." Before Karvok could respond, the external cameras flickered. The screen glitched, distorting with static, before refocusing on the human ship. Except now, something was different. The ship was no longer just there. It was closer. It hadn't moved. There had been no thruster activation, no shift in its position. And yet, it was undeniably closer. And then the lights inside their own ship went out. Total darkness. The only illumination came from the screens, casting eerie glows across the terrified faces of the crew. Someone gasped. Someone else let out a choked whimper. Karvok felt something cold press against his chest, an instinct, a primal warning screaming in his mind. Then, the comms crackled again. "You should have left." A sudden, deafening clang erupted from the hallway. A scream followed, then another. Gunfire. The crew inside the bridge jolted in place, gripping their weapons. Karvok turned sharply, his mind racing. His men were some of the toughest warriors in the fleet. They didn't scream. They didn't panic. But now they were dying. The comms remained open, but now, instead of the ominous voice, it broadcasted something else. The sound of breathing. Labored, distorted, inhuman. Karvok's hands clenched into fists. "Seal the bridge." Vashrik obeyed, slamming the emergency lockdown controls. The doors hissed as reinforced barriers slid into place. No one was getting in. No one was getting out. The ship groaned. Not from battle damage. Not from external pressure. From something else. A new notification flashed across the control panel. The FTL drive. It had been overridden. By something else. The bridge was filled with terrified murmurs. Karvok refused to let fear take hold. "Get us moving. I don't care if we have to rip the drive apart and restart it manually." And then, a whisper, not from the speakers, not from the comms, from inside the bridge. "It's already too late." Karvok turned, weapon raised. The shadows had grown longer, and they were moving. The ship's groaning continued, the metal itself seeming to strain under the pressure of something far beyond its design. Karvok's heart raced in his chest, his breath shallow and fast. His eyes flicked over the crew, now visibly shaken, their once steady hands trembling as they gripped their weapons. There was no escaping this. Whatever had boarded their ship, whatever had attached itself to the hull, it wasn't just a random attacker. This was something far worse, something that had been waiting for them. The hum that had filled the bridge before seemed to intensify, vibrating through the walls and floors. It wasn't mechanical. It wasn't any kind of sound they had ever encountered. It was alive, pulsing with a rhythm that was almost organic. The darkness seemed to grow thicker with each passing second, suffocating every member of the crew, dragging them into the unknown. "We need to get out of here," one of the younger crew members shouted, panic evident in his voice. He was scrambling to reactivate the FTL drive, fingers moving rapidly over the controls, but the screens before him flashed an error message. "Faster than light travel disabled. External interference detected." "Blast it." Karvok snarled, slamming his fist against the control panel. The lights flickered violently, and for a moment, the ship seemed to lurch, as if it had been struck by an invisible force. Then, just as quickly, everything fell silent again. "Captain," Vashrik's voice trembled. "There's something in the ventilation shafts." Karvok turned slowly, eyes narrowing. The vent systems were designed to maintain the balance of pressure throughout the ship, but now they were nothing more than potential pathways for whatever was on their ship. The crew members had heard it too. The sound of something crawling through the ducts, scraping against the metal, its movements so precise that it almost seemed deliberate. "Seal the vents." Karvok barked. "Shut them off now." But it was too late. A loud crash from above startled everyone. The vents tore open with a suddenness that made the walls quake. From the hole, a dark shape fell into the center of the bridge. For a split second, it was nothing more than a shadow. But the moment it hit the ground, the lights above flickered on, revealing it in full. The creature that now stood before them wasn't human. It wasn't even clothes. Its body was covered in strange, sinewy, dark tendrils that moved like liquid, shifting and writhing. It had no clear shape, no definite form. Its eyes, if they could be called eyes, were dark, empty voids that seemed to stare directly into each crew member's soul. For a moment, no one moved. The creature, too, seemed to hesitate, as if it were studying them, learning them. Then, slowly, its tendrils began to stretch toward the crew. Its body pulsed, each movement synchronized with the eerie hum that continued to reverberate through the ship. "Get back," Karvok shouted, raising his weapon. But the creature didn't flinch. In fact, it seemed to welcome the challenge. The air in the bridge turned cold, like the temperature had dropped by several degrees in an instant. Karvok could see the condensation forming in the air, his breath visible in front of him. He wasn't sure if it was the creature's presence or the ship's systems failing, but it felt as though the walls were closing in on him. The crew was frozen in place, unsure whether to fight or flee. The creature's tendrils shot forward with lightning speed, faster than Karvok could react. One of the crew members, a younger officer, was the first to scream as one of the tendrils wrapped around his throat, lifting him from the ground. He gasped for breath, his eyes bulging in terror as the creature's appendages coiled tighter. "Cut it off! Cut it off!" Karvok roared, but the crew hesitated, paralyzed with fear. None of them had ever seen anything like this before. With a swift motion, Karvok fired his plasma rifle, the beam striking the tendril, but instead of severing it, the shot simply melted the dark, fluid-like mass, only for the creature to reshape itself instantly, as if the attack had never happened. A chilling laugh echoed from the shadows. It wasn't a sound made by the creature. It came from all around them. A distorted, almost mocking sound that made Karvok's blood run cold. It was as if the ship itself was laughing. The young officer struggled, his limbs flailing, but it was useless. He couldn't break free. Karvok knew then that this wasn't just a fight for survival. This was something far more insidious. Whatever this creature was, it had an intelligence that far exceeded theirs. It was aware of them, aware of their every move, and it was clearly toying with them. Desperation filled Karvok's mind. He turned to Vashrik. "Activate the emergency thrusters. Now." Vashrik fumbled with the controls, panic making his movements clumsy. "It's no use, Captain. They've locked us in. We can't escape." As the words left Vashrik's mouth, the creature began to change again. Its tendrils loosened from the young officer's body, leaving him to fall to the floor, unconscious but alive. The creature didn't seem to care. It was after something else now. Something more important. The hum intensified. The creature's form began to solidify, and before Karvok could react, a harsh, blinding light erupted from the center of the bridge. It wasn't an attack. It was something worse, something that threatened to consume them all. Karvok's mind raced. He had to think quickly. He had to find a way to escape. But even as he planned, the answer felt so distant, so unreachable. It was already too late. The bridge was bathed in a blinding white light, so intense that Karvok had to shield his eyes. The air felt heavy, pressing down on his chest as if gravity itself had shifted. The crew staggered, some collapsing to their knees, their bodies trembling under the overwhelming force that filled the room. The creature stood at the center of it all, its form shifting, growing, becoming something even more incomprehensible. The tendrils that had once been liquid now hardened into jagged, crystalline spikes, pulsing with energy. The hum that had filled the ship for so long now became a deafening, bone-rattling resonance that drilled into their minds. Then, without warning, the sound stopped. The light dimmed. The creature changed. It no longer looked monstrous. Its shape had settled into something vaguely humanoid, though still alien in every way. Its face, if it could be called that, was smooth, featureless, except for the deep, void-like pits where eyes should be. It raised one hand, and for the first time, it spoke. Its voice was not mechanical, not distorted. It was clear, it was calm, and it was human. "You never should have come here." The words sent a shockwave through Karvok's body. Every crew member who still had the strength to stand froze, their faces contorted in a mix of fear and disbelief. This was impossible. This creature, this thing, couldn't be human. Humans were supposed to be extinct, wiped out, gone. And yet, Karvok clenched his jaw, forcing his voice to remain steady. "What are you?" The figure tilted its head slightly, almost as if considering the question. Then it took a slow step forward, the ship groaning beneath its weight. "The last remnant," it answered. "The last warning." A chill ran down Karvok's spine. He had read the old war reports, the classified files about the Terran fleet that had vanished without a trace. The galaxy had assumed they had perished, consumed by some unseen catastrophe. But now, as he stood in the presence of something beyond his understanding, he realized the truth. The humans had never been destroyed. They had been waiting. The bridge's control panels flickered back to life, screens flashing lines of unfamiliar code. Karvok turned his gaze to the displays, only to see the terrifying reality unfold before him. The ship's navigation had been overridden. The destination coordinates had changed. They were no longer drifting in the dead void of space. They were moving. Fast. One of the crew members gasped. "Captain, we're on a collision course." Karvok's heart pounded. Collision course. With what? The figure stepped aside, allowing Karvok a clear view of the main viewport. What he saw made his breath catch in his throat. A ship. No, not just a ship. A colossus. A warship of impossible size, floating in the abyss like a sleeping god. Its hull was dark, ancient, but intact. Its weapons, though silent, radiated a power unlike anything the galaxy had ever known. This was no derelict vessel. This was a ship that had endured, waiting in the shadows. And now, it was waking up. The figure spoke again, its voice carrying an edge of finality. "You wanted to know why human ships travel alone. Now you understand." Alarms blared. The crew scrambled, desperate to regain control. But it was useless. The ship was no longer theirs. It belonged to something far greater. As Karvok stared at the awakening warship, a single horrifying realization dawned on him. They were not the hunters. They had never been. They were the prey.